The ravine smelled like wet iron and cold stone. Lauren had not meant to fall. He was 9 years old and had been chasing a blinking signal on his bioscanner, a small device his mother let him borrow on days she was too tired to argue. The scanner had led him past the colony's safety markers, past the orange flags that meant stop, past the ridge where the soil turned from dark brown to pale gray, and then the ground had simply ended. He fell 6 meters. The rocks at the bottom were not soft. He lay still for a long moment, checking himself the way his father had taught him. Fingers, toes, breathe in, breathe out. His right arm screamed when he moved it. His left knee was bleeding through his pants. His bioscanner was somewhere above him, its light still blinking uselessly at the edge of the ridge. He tried to climb. The ravine wall was loose shale, and every time he reached for a handhold, a small avalanche came down with it. On his third attempt, a larger section gave way. A flat rock the size of a table came down and landed across both his legs. He could not move it. Lauren did not cry right away. He yelled for a while first. He yelled until his throat was raw and the echo of his own voice stopped being a comfort. Then he looked up at the thin strip of purple sky above the ravine and understood, with the calm clarity that sometimes visits children before it visits adults, that he was in serious trouble. Night came fast on Oran 5. The temperature dropped faster. He curled as small as he could and tucked his good arm under his chest. The colony was maybe 2 kilometers east. Search teams would come. His mother would notice the scanner was gone. Someone would come. He only had to wait. He was still telling himself this when something moved in the shadows at the far end of the ravine. Lauren went very still. It was small. That was the first thing he noticed, far smaller than any of the animals the colony's biology team had catalogued. It picked its way across the rubble on 4 legs, wings folded tight to its back, head low and moving side to side the way a dog moves when it is tracking a smell. Its scales caught what little light remained and gave it back as dull gold. It stopped 3 meters away and looked at him. Lauren looked back. The creature was roughly the size of a large house cat. Its eyes were amber, very bright, and they did not blink for a long time. Its snout was short and slightly upturned. There were small ridges along its brow that Lauren could not name, but somehow read as young, the same way he could tell a puppy from a grown dog without knowing why. He said very quietly, "Hello." The creature tilted its head. It came closer. It sniffed his injured arm, then his face, then the rock across his legs. It pressed one small clawed foot against the rock and pushed. The rock did not move. It tried again from a different angle, still nothing. Lauren watched it try 4 more times before it stopped. It sat back on its haunches and looked at him for a long moment. Then, with the unhurried decision of something that has made up its mind, it walked to his chest and lay down on top of him. It was warm, warmer than anything had a right to be on a night that cold. Lauren could feel heat radiating off its scales like a banked fire. It tucked its small head under his chin, wings spread slightly, and breathed out a long, slow breath that came as a thin curl of smoke and warmth across his collarbone. Lauren did not move. He was afraid to. The cold, which had been pressing in from all sides, loosened its grip a little, just a little, enough. He slept without meaning to. He woke to voices and light, the colony's search team, 4 of them, with 2 large lamps and a stretcher. His mother's voice was among them, sharp and frightened and getting louder. He tried to call out and managed something close enough. The weight on his chest was gone. He turned his head as the first searcher reached the ravine floor. At the top of the far wall, just at the edge of the lamplight, he saw a shape, small, gold, wings half open. Then it was gone. The medics said he had mild hypothermia, a hairline fracture in his right arm, and a badly bruised knee. His mother sat beside his bed for 3 hours and did not let go of his hand. When he told her about the small golden creature, she smoothed his hair and said that cold and fear could make a person see things. He did not argue, but he knew what warm felt like. He knew what it felt like to have something choose to stay. He did not forget that. Not once, not in all the years that came after. The intelligence packet arrived at 3:40, while the ISV threshold was making a slow survey arc near the outer rim. It was flagged routine. Most things flagged routine were not worth reading before sunrise. Lauren read it immediately. He had a habit of not sleeping well near the outer rim. Too many colony worlds out here, too many places that felt like home. The packet contained 14 pages of Vhoran Dominion fleet movement data, cross-referenced with known resource surveys. The Vhoran did not invade randomly. They moved like accountants, slow, careful, never committing until the math was finished. The math, according to 14 pages of intelligence, was now finished for 6 outer rim targets. Oran 5 was third on the list. Lauren set the packet down. He picked it back up. He read the Oran 5 section 4 times. The way a person reads something they are hopping will change on the next pass. It did not change. He filed a priority response to Fleet Command before the sun came up. He outlined the Vhoran survey pattern, the mineral value of Oran 5, the colony's defense rating, which was not a defense rating so much as a note that there were 2 decommissioned gun platforms and a hope. He recommended immediate reinforcement of the outer rim corridor. Fleet Command replied in 6 hours. The reply was polite and thorough and said nothing at all. 3 days later, a Veldrani diplomatic courier docked at Concord headquarters. This was unusual. The Veldrani, a species of ancient, scale-skinned, long-lived creatures that the Concord xenobiologists described with phrases like apex-tier intelligence and historically disinterested in lesser species, almost never initiated contact. When they did, the Concord listened the way small children listen to adults who have already decided something. Warden Grell, the Veldrani representative, wanted navigation rights through the Oran corridor. In exchange, the Veldrani would consider formal diplomatic relations, the first step toward a relationship that every Concord politician had spent the last 40 years dreaming about. The Oran corridor ran directly past Oran 5. If the Concord granted the rights, Concord military vessels could not operate in the corridor without Veldrani approval. Oran 5 would be, in practical terms, undefended and unreachable. Lauren sat in the back of the briefing room and listened to 3 admirals discuss what a historic opportunity this was. He raised his hand. He was given 2 minutes. He used them to explain, as clearly as he could, that they were being asked to trade a colony of 4,000 people for a diplomatic handshake that had no enforcement mechanism and no timeline. Admiral Sorin, sitting to the left of the room, was the only one who looked at him while he spoke. The vote was not close. Lauren was reassigned to standard patrol. The outer rim was, he was told, a matter now being handled at a higher level. He should trust the process. He was given a sympathetic handshake by an officer who could not quite meet his eyes. He went back to the threshold. He sat in his bunk. Dax, his crewmate and the closest thing he had to a person who told him the truth, leaned against the doorframe and said nothing for a while. Then Dax said, "You knew they'd do this." Lauren said, "Yes." "So what now?" Lauren did not answer because he did not have one. He had filed the reports. He had made the case. He had followed every process the Concord had built for exactly this kind of situation, and every process had worked perfectly and produced the wrong result. He was still sitting with that when his personal comm unit chimed. No sender ID, no message, only a set of coordinates, far edge of the Veldrani territorial boundary, near a mountain range called the Ash Spires on no map he'd ever used, and below the coordinates, a single image. A small flame. He stared at it for a long time. He had not thought about the ravine in years. That was not true. He had thought about it often, but carefully, the way you think about something you can't explain to anyone without sounding like you imagined it. He had never told anyone except his mother, and his mother had called it a fever dream, and he had let her. But he had not imagined it. He knew what warm felt like. He pulled up the coordinates on the navigation console. Remote, accessible by shuttle, 3 days travel. He was supposed to be on standard patrol. He looked at the small flame on his comm screen for another minute. Then he began filing a request for personal leave. He had not taken personal leave in 4 years. He had more than enough accumulated. Outside the viewport, the stars did not move. They never did. They only looked like they did from the right angle. He filed the request. He started packing. The HFY Mountains did not appear on any Concorde navigation chart as a landing site. The terrain was listed as uneven and geologically unstable, which turned out to be the kind of language someone uses when they have never actually been there and are guessing from orbit images. Lauren brought the shuttle down on a flat shelf of dark rock at the base of the largest peak and cut the engines. He sat for a moment. Wind moved across the shelf, slow and dry. Then a shadow passed over the cockpit, very large, very fast. He was outside before he had decided to move. The creature that landed on the far edge of the rock shelf was nothing like what he remembered. That was not quite right. It was exactly what he remembered, scaled up by a factor that made rational thought briefly difficult. The amber scales were the same color. The eyes were the same bright gold. The ridge along the brow was the same, just longer now, curving back along a head that was level with the top of his shuttle when the neck was relaxed. The wings folded, the head lowered, the eyes found him. Lauren stood very still. The creature, Riss, though Lauren did not know the name yet, regarded him with an expression that was calm in a way that took up physical space. Then it spoke. The sound that came first was not words. It was a low vibration, felt more in the chest than heard by the ears. Then a small device on a cord around its neck, something clearly not Veldrani in origin, something deliberately acquired, emitted a steady tone, and when the vibration came again, it arrived as language. "You came," Lauren said. "You sent coordinates. I was not certain you would follow them. I wasn't certain either." The creature settled back slightly. "You are older. 22 years tends to do that." Something shifted in the amber eyes. Not humor, exactly, something adjacent to it. "I know how long it has been. I have been watching you for most of it." Lauren processed this, watching me. Veldrani do not forget life debts. My clan considers the debt I carry to be minor, one human child, one cold night, nothing that required more than basic warmth to resolve. They told me to set it aside. A pause. I did not agree. "So you tracked me. I learned your language. I learned your communication systems. I monitored your career. I watched you file 14 separate reports about Outer Rim colony defense. I watched all 14 be dismissed." Another pause, and this one had weight in it. "I have been waiting for the moment the debt would matter enough to balance." Lauren looked at the creature, at Riss, and tried to arrange his thoughts into something useful. He had expected many things from these coordinates. He had not expected this. He had not expected to be standing in front of the childhood memory that no one had believed, except that it had grown large enough to put its head through a building. He said, "You know about Oran 5. I know about the Vhorin survey pattern. I know about the Concorde Agreement. I know that the corridor will be closed and the colony will be exposed." The head tilted, just slightly, in a motion that was exactly the same as it had been 22 years ago on a ravine floor. "And I know you will go there. I've been reassigned away from the Outer Rim." "Yes, and you will go anyway." He did not argue because it was true. He had known it was true since the moment he read the intelligence packet. He had just needed a few days to work out the shape of it. He said, "I can't ask you to come with me. The Veldrani are neutral. If you act against the Vhorin, I am acting for a debt, not against anyone." A breath came out, long, slow, carrying a thread of warmth even at this distance. "My clan does not support this. I do not have the council. I have only myself." Lauren looked at what only himself amounted to in physical terms. Riss was not large by Veldrani elder standards. He understood, middle-aged, still growing, but the wingspan, even folded, stretched past the shuttle's nose. The claws on the near forefoot were each longer than Lauren's forearm. A single, mid-sized, politically unauthorized dragon. He heard Dax's voice in his earpiece, Dax, patched in remotely, who had been listening to the entire conversation without saying anything. Dax said, "Is that a dragon?" Lauren said, "Yes." "A real one?" "Yes." A long silence. Then, "Okay, I'm pulling up Orin 5 defensive terrain maps. Give me an hour." Lauren looked back at Riss. The amber eyes had not moved. He said, "If we do this, the debt is settled." Riss said, "If you survive, I will consider it." It was, Lauren thought, probably the most honest thing anyone had said to him in years. He walked back toward the shuttle to start planning, and behind him, on the flat dark rock of the Ashspire Shelf, the largest and most loyal mistake the Veldrani Council had ever overlooked spread its wings and waited. They came in fast and low, Riss flying parallel to the shuttle through the corridor's edge like a second moon keeping pace with a planet. The shuttle's sensors had to be recalibrated twice because they kept flagging Riss as an unidentified atmospheric threat and trying to alert command. Lauren switched the alerts off. Orin 5 appeared on the viewport as a pale brown disk with green edges where the farming zones ran along the equator. From orbit, it looked peaceful. From orbit, things often did. Dax had done good work in the hour given. The terrain maps were ready. More importantly, Dax had also quietly, unofficially, and at significant personal risk, sent a narrowband warning to Orin 5's colony administrator, a woman named Barrett, who had been running the settlement for 11 years and had the particular calm of someone who has handled too many crises to be frightened by new ones. Barrett's response had been 4 words: "How long do we have?" Dax's answer had been, "Hours, not days." When Lauren landed at the colony's main yard, Barrett was already there. She looked at the shuttle. She looked at Riss, who had landed in the open field to the south and was currently the reason every colony child had pressed their face against a window. Barrett said, "That's a Veldrani." Lauren said, unofficially, "Is it going to help?" "That's why we're here." Barrett nodded once, the way people nod when the information is strange, but the decision is already made. "Tell me what you need." What Lauren needed was time. The Vihoran Advance Fleet, 3 destroyer-class ships, and a troop transport, according to Dax's intercepts, was coming in from the far side of the system. They would hit orbit in approximately 4 hours. Evacuation transports from the nearest Concord relay point were 11 hours away. That was the gap, 7 hours. 7 hours between the Vihoran arriving and any official help reaching Orin 5. He laid it out for Barrett without softening it, and Barrett listened without flinching, and then she went to work. She had 2 decommissioned orbital defense platforms on the colony's north and south poles. Both were old enough to have been built by people who were now retired. Lauren went up to the north platform with 2 of the colony's engineers and spent 90 minutes doing things that were definitely not covered in the service manual. The platform came online. It had 1 functional mass driver array and the targeting sensors of something considerably older, but it could point at the sky and mean it. Riss took position above the colony's main approach corridor, the flat valley that ran from the landing zone down to the colony dome. From above, Lauren could see the shadow he cast, wings spread. It covered the entire width of the corridor. The Vihoran arrived 7 minutes early. The first ship dropped through the cloud layer, running a standard suppression pattern, broadband electromagnetic pulse, designed to knock out colony electronics before anyone could resist. What it was not designed for was a mid-sized Veldrani launching up from a standing position and intersecting its flight path. Riss did not breathe fire at first. He used his mass. The impact of his shoulder against the lead ship's port stabilizer was enough to send it into a spin. It pulled up and climbed hard, which was the right instinct, but meant it climbed directly into the line of fire of Lauren's repaired mass driver platform. The driver put a round through the ship's engine nacelle. The ship did not explode. It vented badly and began a controlled emergency descent 300 kilometers north of the colony. Lauren counted that as a result. The second and third destroyers came in more carefully now. They had not expected any of this. Their tactical models, Dax said over comms, pulling intercepted communications in real time, were flagging the situation as anomalous. The word they used translated as approximately irrational resistance. Riss hit the second destroyer twice more, taking blast damage to his left wing on the third pass. He pulled back, slower now, one wing holding at a strange angle. He landed hard at the edge of the colony perimeter, skidding through the fence line, and did not get up immediately. Lauren saw it from the platform and felt something cold move through his chest that had nothing to do with the altitude. The third destroyer had identified Riss as the primary threat. It dropped low and slow, weapons tracking. The troop transport was already entering atmosphere behind it. Dax's voice came through the comms, steady and direct. Last evacuation shuttle lifted with the children and the injured. Remaining colonists refused to board. Barrett's trying to move them. They won't go. Lauren looked down at the colony below him, at the people still there. Then he climbed back into the shuttle and started the engine. He was going to need to be on the ground for what came next. Riss had not lost consciousness. This was, Lauren decided, the single best piece of information he had received all day. The left wing was damaged along the leading edge, a long burn scar from a Vhorin directed energy weapon that had caught him mid-turn. He could not fly. He was breathing in long, slow pulls, each exhale carrying a faint curl of smoke. He had dragged himself, using his forelegs, to the entrance of the colony's main access corridor, the only ground approach wide enough for Vhorin troop carriers to move through, and he had not moved from it. He had not been told to do this. He had simply looked at the corridor, looked back at the colony behind it, and chosen his position. Lauren knelt beside his head for a moment. Riss turned one amber eye toward him without lifting his chin from the ground. Lauren said, "Can you hold?" Riss said, through the translation device that had survived intact, "Ask me something harder." Lauren stood up and turned to face the colony. There were roughly 2,000 colonists who had refused the evacuation order. He had expected to face that number down, to argue with them, to invoke regulations they had every right to ignore out here on the edge of nothing. He had the speech ready. He did not need it. Barrett was already standing on an equipment crate with a mining charge slung over one shoulder, talking to a crowd that was not asking for permission. They were asking for positions. A man in a drilling rig operator's vest wanted to know if the processing plant's ventilation pressure system could be redirected through the exterior vents to create a blast corridor. A woman from the agricultural station had already wired 4 atmospheric processor units in series and was asking if the output was better aimed at infantry or vehicles. 3 teenagers, who were absolutely not old enough to be in this conversation, had modified a survey drone swarm into a sensor net and handed the controller to Dax through a remote uplink without being asked. Lauren looked at all of this for 2 full seconds. Then he started giving positions. He put the mining crews on the east and west ridges. They knew the terrain better than anyone, and they had charges that could reshape it if needed. The agricultural equipment rigs went to the choke point, 80 meters behind Riss, as a second line. The medical station was moved into the colony dome's deepest section. Barrett took command of the center, because Barrett had been doing that for 11 years anyway, and the only difference now was that she had a mining charge and less patience. The Vhorin troop carriers came in 20 minutes later. There were 4 of them, heavy-bodied, designed for planetary assaults against defended positions. They had drop troops, heavy armor, and a command broadcast that went out on all frequencies, telling the colony to stand down and accept absorption into the Dominion. The broadcast promised an orderly process. It was not answered. The carriers moved up the corridor and found a wounded dragon lying across it. The lead carrier stopped. It sat there for a long moment, its command systems presumably trying to locate a protocol for this in its operational files. Then Riss breathed fire on it. He could not fly, and he could not chase anything down. What he could do was generate a sustained burst of plasma temperature flame from a position that could not easily be flanked because the corridor walls were 40 meters of solid rock on either side. The lead carrier's forward armor held. The second blast began to disagree with the carrier's opinion of itself. The drop troops who came around on foot met the mining crews on the ridges, which went poorly for the troops. The armor that tried to push past Riss met the agricultural processor rigs, which had been redesigned by a woman who grew food for 4,000 people and had decided that was not going to stop being the case today. Lauren moved constantly, from position to position, fixing problems, pulling people back when a line pushed too far, sending Dax information to relay to Admiral Soren, who was sitting outside the corridor boundary doing absolutely nothing officially. It lasted 2 hours and 14 minutes. The Vihorin commander, Vayek, sent a direct communication to Lauren's personal comm at the 90-minute mark. The message said that this resistance was pointless, that the colony's resources were needed, and that the Dominion was prepared to be reasonable. Lauren did not reply. At the 2-hour mark, Soren's fleet came through the corridor, officially unauthorized, officially the end of his career. He had filed the order himself, countersigned by no one, and brought in 6 ships that the Vihorin had not factored into any of their models because they were not supposed to be there. Vayek's fleet, suddenly bracketed between a naval force from above and a colony that had decided to be unreasonable from below, broke off and climbed for deep space. The last Vihorin transmission, intercepted by Dax, was 3 words. It translated as, "Reclassify, threat level irrational." Lauren sat down in the dirt of the corridor, back against the rock wall, and let the silence come in. Riss was 4 meters away, still lying across the corridor entrance, eyes half closed. The amber glow had not gone out. After a moment, one enormous, scaled head moved a few degrees to the left. Looking at him, Lauren nodded. Riss closed his eyes. Behind them, Orin 5 was still standing. 13 names. Barrett read them aloud at dawn, 3 days after the Vihorin left. She stood in the center of the colony yard with her notes on a single piece of paper and read each name clearly, one after the other, and when she was finished, she folded the paper and put it in her pocket and said nothing else. There was nothing else to say that would be useful. Lauren stood at the back of the crowd. He had attended the reading because it was right to attend. He stayed at the back because he did not feel that he had earned the front. Riss was healing. Veldrani recovery was slow, but the colony's medics, who had adapted quickly to the question of how one treats a creature the size of a building, had confirmed there was no permanent damage. The wing membrane would regenerate. It would take months. Riss had received this information with the same expression he used for all information, which was no expression at all, and had returned to lying in the open field south of the dome where the grass was flat and the sky was wide. On the 3rd morning, before the reading, Lauren walked out to the field and sat down near him. The sun on Orin 5 came up slowly, spending a long time in the orange register before it committed to anything brighter. It turned the amber scales a deep, burnished red for a few minutes, and the damaged wing, still bound with field dressings the size of cargo tarps, caught the light in a way that looked almost like stained glass. They sat together without speaking for a while. Lauren was good at that. It turned out Riss was too. Eventually, Riss said, "The debt is settled." Lauren did not respond immediately. Riss continued, "One life saved, one life protected, the scales are balanced." Something in the translation device's tone suggested this was not simply a statement, but a formal one, the kind that had weight in Veldrani culture, the way signed documents had weight in human culture. Lauren said, "Can I ask you something first?" A pause, "Yes." "That night in the ravine. You didn't know me, you had nothing to gain from staying. There was no debt yet, I hadn't given you anything, you hadn't promised me anything. You just stayed because I was cold." Riss was quiet. "So the debt that you've been carrying for 22 years, the thing your clan dismissed, and you didn't, it wasn't really about debt at all, was it? You stayed that night because of who you already were. The debt thing came after, but the reason you stayed came before any of that." The amber eyes were open fully now, watching him with the same unblinking attention they had given a 9-year-old boy in a ravine. Rhys said, "That is a difficult thing to hear." "Is it wrong?" A very long pause, longer than the others. "No." Lauren nodded. "Then I don't think the debt is the point. I think you are." He did not know if that made sense in Veldrani terms. He did not know if Rhys would carry that thought or set it aside. He suspected it would be carried. Rhys was, demonstrably, very good at carrying things. He stood up, brushing dust from his jacket. Dax found him at the colony's communications relay an hour later, eating a meal that had gone cold without him noticing. Dax sat across from him and pushed a data chip across the table. Soren's verdict came in, Dax said. Formal censure, rank reduction, desk assignment, core worlds. He filed the retirement request himself before they could reassign him. Lauren took the chip. He knew what he was filing when he gave the order. He did, Dax paused. Concords also quietly opened a review of the Outer Rim Defense Doctrine, apparently having footage of 4,000 civilians and a wounded dragon hold off a V-Horin assault group tends to make people reconsider what counts as a strategic asset. Barrett will be pleased. Barrett has already submitted 11 amendments. Lauren almost smiled. What about Warden Grell? The Veldrani Council has called an internal review of their neutrality position, no public statement, but the review was called the day after the footage reached their channels. A pause. Grell requested the footage personally. Lauren looked at the data chip in his hand and thought about a small creature pressing its foot against a rock. It could not move, trying anyway, and then making a different choice. Some things did not require size. He put the chip down. I'm requesting Outer Rim reassignment. Dax said, I know, I already filed mine. You didn't have to. You're going to do something like this again, Dax said, in the tone of someone reading from a document they have already accepted. Statistically, it's certain. I'd rather be there when it happens than hear about it on the relay. Lauren had no answer for that. Outside, through the relay station's single narrow window, the southern field was visible. The morning sun had fully risen now, white and clean across the flat grass. Rhys had not moved from his position, but his head was up, turned toward the sky, watching something that was not visible from the ground. He was still there when the noon light came, still watching, still present. Some debts, Lauren thought, were less about repayment and more about the shape of a thing. The shape of a creature that stayed when it didn't have to, in the cold and the dark, for no reason except that a child was there and needed warmth. That shape didn't go away when the debt was cleared. It was just what the creature was. He picked up his coffee. It was also cold. He drank it anyway and went back to work.